Hello. Welcome to the Vashon Heritage Museum. Thanks for joining us in person and also online. Welcome to On the Waterfront with Frank Zellerhoff. It's a co-production between the Vashon Heritage Museum and the Cascade Rail Foundation. I encourage everyone to go on our website and check out our land acknowledgement and mission statement. Important things there, and to take a look at some other events that we have coming up. We have our Heritage Gala coming up this month and some other fun programs too. But you're in for a great program today. Thank you for joining us, and without further ado, I would like to introduce Jonathan Fisher.
Hi everybody, I'm Jonathan Fisher from Cascade Rail Foundation and the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive in Burien, Washington. We've got an exciting and fun program today. You know, Frank and I have spent a number of events together. We did one on Cedar Falls, where Frank was the last living substation operator. Last year we did a program with Frank up in Sequim, which we call a Squiminar, where we talked about Frank's career with the Seattle and North Coast Railroad, which came after the Milwaukee Road and after Frank left working for the Milwaukee Road. Today we're going to be looking at one that's kind of in the middle between those two, between Cedar Falls and Sequim, and that was Frank's career on the Seattle waterfront on Pier 27. Very interesting operation. The idea that we would put freight cars on barges and float them around Puget Sound is kind of a novel idea. One of the great stories I always remember was the United States Navy trying to get a ship into Bremerton in fog, and the person on the bow said, "Stop." And the captain said, "Why?" And he said, "I think there's a freight train in front of us." And of course it was the barge. And so it's just so interesting, and Frank and I really enjoy our time together. Frank, right? And let's just sit back and enjoy what Frank's got to say. And today, folks, it's a 2-for-1 special, because not only are we going to talk about Frank's railroad career, but then, better still, Frank's dear friend Bruce Hallman will be here for our second program, talking about Frank's life and times here on Vashon Island. People asked me, they said, "Why are you doing a program on Vashon Island?" And of course, I said, so that all of Frank's friends and family could be here to be able to enjoy the program too. So thanks for taking time out of your busy Saturday to be here. It's a beautiful day outside today. And let's get started, Frank.
Go for it.
So
Eyeball the gate.
Okay, here's our program. So take a look at the pictures and you start talking. So here's a map of downtown Seattle, and this is where Frank was working, here on Pier 27, which is the east waterway of the Duwamish River.
So, like you said, this is the waterfront yard here. There was 5 tracks here. You had a main, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Total of 5. And track number 3 was a UP only track, where they brought grain cars in, and they could come in like with 500 tons of grain, and then the Burlington Northern would come out of their yard, which was here. And then they'd come in here, ball face in here, ball face means back in, and pick up these cars and then run along the waterfront and take them over to the grain elevator. And so we had to be pretty careful about utilizing this number 3 track when we were making up cars for the barge, because making the cars up had to be done in relative to the tonnage of the cars, and also to what was in it. In other words, if they were propane cars, well, or anhydrous ammonia cars, we had to keep them in the middle tracks of the barge. And then we'd have fertilizer, believe it or not. We'd send fertilizer up to Sequim that to be taken in a helicopter to fertilize the forest, especially after there was any forest fires. And they were 100 tons. So when you went to put 100 tons on the barge, especially if you went on one of the side tracks, you create a pretty good list. So sometimes you had to do acey-deucey, a couple on this side and a couple on that side to keep everything stable. And the big thing was you had to work the whole thing around the elevation of the tide. If the tide was going down, well, then you had to be extremely careful about going down, like going onto the ferry. When you're dropping down to the ferry, you can hang up the bottom of your rig on the apron or something like that. Well, you do that with a 100-ton rail car, you got a big problem.
And we'll see more of that.
Oh yeah, so there's the Alaskan Way Viaduct there.
Remember that? This is our yard down here in the freight house.
Holy mackerel. I'm having a hard time getting oriented. Sears and Roebuck?
Sears is a little bit south of here. So this picture was taken in the mid-1960s, and we know when this picture was taken because right up here we can see a new highway being built. That highway would be Interstate 5. So this is the north end of the Milwaukee Yard that Frank worked at, and here's the Milwaukee Road Freight House. So it just kind of gives us a little bit of a perspective on where we're at. Does that all look right to you, Frank? Let's dive ahead. Here's a picture of Pier 27. Can you tell us about that?
So Pier 27, this is a pretty old picture too. Oh yeah, okay, so this is already a container yard here. So this was what we called the east fence here, and this was the west fence. And this is the slip, the same as you have with the ferry slip. This is a 3-track barge that's in here now. I can't tell which one it is. These two barges here are barge 20 and 21. They were specifically for going up to Port Townsend. And when I first started there in 77, 76?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
74.
After Cedar Falls.
These made a round trip up to the Olympic Peninsula almost every other day because Crown Zellerback had an operation at Port Angeles and an operation at Port Townsend. And ITT Rainier had a pretty good sized operation at Port Angeles, and that's where they made magazine paper and photographic paper. And then there were still quite a few lumber yards producing lumber up there. And we shipped carloads of propane up there and a few miscellaneous things. I took empty boxcars up there and I parked them at Squim for the Boy Scouts to put newspapers in for recycling that went to Wenatchee. From there they came on the barges to Seattle, and that was a kind of a donation thing we did for the Boy Scouts. So these two barges had a lot of traffic locally, but then in the 80s, like today, things was kind of going downhill. And so Crown Z started closing down their mills and things became pretty difficult. So this barge here would probably be from the bow here, looking at this looked to me like be the Foss 250. The Foss 250 was a 4-track barge. Could carry about 4 cars on each track. It did not have a switch on it, so you had to shift the barge over. You'd pull a track, pull 2 tracks off the barge, the outside track, and then maybe the 3rd track in. And then you'd bring 4 empty cars down and put them on that side track, then slide the barge over, pull the rest of the cars off and put the rest of the other cars on.
Frank, how would you get the cars onto the barge? Was it a little pusher engine that could go onto the barge, or how did you do that?
Well, okay, the train crew, you had a locomotive, and then you'd have what we call 2 or 3 idlers. Idlers would be empty flat cars. So they give the hoghead is the engineer, so the hoghead could have a pretty good view of where the hell it's going. Because you'll see a picture a little later on where the hoghead didn't realize that the barge wasn't underneath the apron.
Yeah, we'll get to that. That's a famous one.
Give us some perspective. Where would the Kingdome and the stadiums today be in this photograph?
I can't say.
That's okay, I got it. So the Kingdome in the stadiums, let me just back up here for a second. So when we look at this picture, we're just off to the left here. And so the stadiums would have been right up in here because those were all built in former railroad yards. That's how they did that. So here we are with one of your little switch engines, Frank.
Yeah, that's a 614. That's a 1,000 horse diesel. This is Sears Roebuck. And this is a pig car. A pig car is a container car. We called them pigs. Anyway, because of piggybacking. Those cars went on a long track, was past Sears Roebuck, north of Sears Roebuck, then turned down, and then there was a large concrete slab there with a loader for loading the containers onto the rail cars. There was no loader for when I first came. The way they got the containers on, the containers were also on a wheel chassis. So the truck drivers would go up to Alaska Street, and there was a concrete ramp, and they would back that container up there onto that ramp, and then from one railroad car to the next, they had these fold-up ramps that would lay down, and those truck drivers had to be pretty sharp. We tried to keep those pig cars like no more than 6 cars long, so they didn't have to back down like 20 cars. And then, of course, we got the loaders later on that should grab just the container off the truck chassis and put it on cars, rail cars, and originally it was just like one container on a car, and then they started stacking them up, and it was pretty interesting, but that's how freight went, and it's still going that way today.
So just a quick note on Sears Roebuck, which is now used by another company, I forget who, but I can give you a hint. This was built in 1914 originally, and it was built for people that ordered merchandise from the Sears catalog, and they would have it delivered in Seattle, and this would be where you would go and pick it up. So
let me interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
This Sears Roebuck building is very historic, as you probably all know. So let's see, I got out of high school in '57, so about '55, they had a problem with the elevator at Sears and Roebuck. And the problem was we had a high tide, and the water seeped into the subfloor of the elevator, and they needed to work in there. So I cut up slabs of dry ice. These blocks of dry ice were like 60 or 75 pounds, and I cut them up on a big bandsaw, and then we'd wrap them slabs up like this in newspaper, and then when we got to Sears Roebuck, we'd cut one side of the paper off. We'd drop this dry ice down there to freeze the water, break the water out of there, and work on elevator shaft.
There's more good stories where this one came from, believe me. So here we are with a little bit bigger switch engine now.
Yeah, this was a newer, this is like a 1,400 horsepower locomotive. This is the yard office here, which I got involved in there around '74 when the electrified railroad was being dismantled. The railroad asked me if I'd go to Kansas City or Chicago or San Francisco. I said, I don't think so, because I already started building my house over here already in '73. So then they came back and they gave me a 5-year guarantee job in Seattle, and it originally started out with just doing the barges. And then the next thing, the clerk that would be sending cars over to the waterfront, he would get on a computer, would tell him what was in the cars and where it was supposed to go. So they just willy-nilly brought them over to the waterfront. Then we had to shift them all around. So we had to, so instead of shifting the cars around twice, once over here and once over there, then I started working in the office here, and I'd make a list of, I'd get a list of the cars on all the tracks that you saw in the pictures. And then the train crew would shake those cars out, switch them out, and take them over there already set up to go on the barge. Because the barge operation had blossomed from the 2 barges, 20 and 21, to like 8 or 9 barges. And that was because of a strike by the British Columbia Railroad and the Burlington Northern that used to interchange cars across the border to bring them down here wouldn't cross the picket lines. So Foss put together, first of all, was 2 barges, the 250 and the 252. And then the next thing that came was the 253, the 274, the 118, the GFG 900. And so instead of handling like a round trip would be like maybe 30 to 40 cars on the barge 20 and 21, now we're dealing with in excess of 100 cars or 200 cars in a turnaround. And to keep the train crews and to keep the information going into the computer was a nightmare. And so that's where I worked out of that office there for quite a while.
So we're just going to take a couple of quick, the Milwaukee, I'm going to back up for a second. So this is the barge slip, and this is that yard that Frank was talking about. We're actually over here because the Sears building is right up in here. So we're going to take a quick tour down this line, and then we're going to come back and start looking in detail at what was going on with the barge slip. So here's a couple of pictures. Here's the yard lead. They're working away.
These 2 tracks here go down to where the pig trains were, where we loaded the containers. You can see the long switches here. This is like a number 8 or 9 turnout, where some of these turnouts up here are like number 5 turnouts. Well, a number 5 turn is really tight, so a 40-foot car could go through there pretty good. But if you try to take a 60-foot car through there, you're going to lift the wheels off the track a little bit.
So just to explain, between our Milwaukee yard by Sears and the Milwaukee yard on the waterfront was the big Northern Pacific / Burlington Northern yard, and that's why we see these Burlington Northern cars in the background. So here we are up at the north end of the yard, Frank.
Right. So this is the 2 main lines here. These are the tracks that we would build up the barge concept. This could very well be one here. Here's a car of ammonia here, and that might be a car of sulfur, and maybe some empty lumber racks. These are empty pig cars here that will go back the other way and then back down the front. But these would come out here and go underneath the Alaskan Way Viaduct till the end car got to Alaska Street, and then they would bald face those cars into the yard there at Pier 27. And that was always kind of a difficult thing because there were no street crossing signals for the automobiles, so you had to get your butt out there with a fusee and stop the traffic, and it could be pretty hairy at times.
Here we are again, switching up at the north end of the yard. Yeah. A couple of these long crossovers. What were those for?
You can see how deteriorated the Milwaukee just wasn't taking care of the track. So you can see how muddy it was there. The tonnage of the cars moving the ties and the switches was pretty. Derailments were a pretty common thing. I did a lot of strange things, get it back on the track.
Yeah, we got some stories coming.
You wouldn't believe it.
So here we are, we're switching. Now tell me about your relationship with this bridge.
Well, this bridge actually came into my life quite a bit while I was living, after I was here on Vashon. So this side here is the Milwaukee side. Sears Roebuck is over here, and that's the BN side over there. Well, when Milwaukee closed down, the BN started using some of the Milwaukee trackage over here, and I actually had a contract when I was doing stuff for myself as well as the Seattle North Coast Railroad. Anyway, the BN came up here with on this track here. This rail car was on this track at this end, and this end was on this track. But when we got to this point, it knocked it down, knocked the bridge down. And so I got the bridge for hauling it out of there. I made a deal with a friend of mine who was superintendent at the Burlington Northern, and I said, hey, give me a drop-in gondola. So a gondola is like a boxcar cut in half, cut the top off, and it was a drop-in gondola. So that meant that the ends of the gondola could be laid down like a garage door instead of going up, laid down. And then I wanted 2 flat cars, a total of 3 cars. So I got a crane to come in and pick this bridge up, lay it on its side in the gondola, so it hung out on the flat car over here and the flat car over there. And then I had to take it over to the Seattle Waterfront. So I took the BN crew to coffee and had them pull this thing over to the Seattle Waterfront, put a big for sale sign on it, and lo and behold, I sold it to my neighbor who lived in your house. He had some kind of a business in Alaska, and he needed to get into this place where he had his business somehow, and so he bought this bridge from me, only if I could get it to Ballard, so they could get it on a barge or a ship going up to Alaska. And so once again, I get together with the superintendent of the BN, Jim, still his name. Can't think of his name. Anyway, he says, well, Frank, he says, you know, you got to do a little bit better than coffee. So there used to be a really nice restaurant there in Ballard, right by the canal. It'd be on the south side of the canal. Maybe it was called the Canal Restaurant or something. In any case, we went over there. We had a hell of a brunch. But they brought it over there, and then it went up to Alaska, and I can't remember what I sold it for, something around $40,000. And so I used that money to pay the wages on the train crew because we didn't have much barge traffic. We weren't getting too, this is when I was doing the Seattle North Coast. We didn't have enough revenue coming in on the barges to pay the train crews. And so I used that money to support the train crews.
So there you go. Let's just take a couple quick picture looks of the switching operation. You can see the Sears building and Frank's Bridge, and this is going south towards Spokane Street. Yeah. And then here's the Spokane Street Tower that existed at one time.
This used to be really important because we used to have coal came into Seattle. It would come out of Enumclaw, Pacific Coast Coal. And a lot of trackage, there was a lot of trackage there. In fact, the Milwaukee ran on trackage in Renton from Enumclaw, from trackage from Enumclaw. And this tower was in charge of putting that coal train on the right tracks here to go down Occidental Street, and then it crossed over First Avenue. You'll notice there where the viaduct, where you go up onto the viaduct. So and and the buildings there are kind of at an angle like that, so the coal train used to go through there, and then they went down the waterfront and turned and went up on this bridge up high like this, and unloaded the coal into the ships. And when I was a little kid, that steam engine, if my grandparents if we had to stop by here, we had to stop for the toof toof, because it was a steam locomotive.
So here's another picture of the Spokane Street Tower. They could never leave the tower because they were responsible to manually operate the grade crossing signs. So the crew was always, the people in the tower were always stuck inside the tower. Here's a picture of a Milwaukee Road train approaching Spokane Street, taken from a Northern Pacific train. And here we have another picture of that about 10 years later. And here's a Milwaukee crew taking a cut of cars from the Milwaukee Yard down to interchange with the Union Pacific Railroad. And here we see that. So now we're going to get a look. So we looked at this area right here along Stacy Street, and now we're going to start getting more into Frank's neck of the woods with the barge slip. It's very interesting stuff. There's your office, Frank, during the Seattle and North Coast era, right? And your friend Dana Davis painted the sign that's on top there.
I didn't know he made that.
Yeah, that's what I heard. And I understand, you know, I've asked a couple times, but your truck, this is not your truck, because you always drove a Dodge, didn't you?
Well, pretty much always rode a Dodge, yeah. But I never parked on the street. It's too dangerous. But there used to be a tavern connected to this building here before the port built all this. But this is the gallows span here, just like the gallows span where you go on the ferry.
We're going to take some close-up looks at that here.
You'll see that pretty soon. I usually parked here I parked around back because we had miscellaneous folks that needed to park in here.
And then with all the international traffic coming from Canada, then you would spend time with your friends from customs, right?
Yeah.
And didn't your dog and the customs agent not have a good relationship? What happened there?
Well, I'm sure some of you might remember my Weimaraners. And so, well, that would have been the first Baron. So that was like 73. 73, I got Baron as a puppy when we started building the house. So Baron would come to work with me, and he would pretty much stay in the truck. But there were times when he would be in the office, and we had a wood stove in the office. In fact, we burned pieces of railroad tie. But and the dog, we had two desks that were back to back in the center of the office, and so the dog would lay underneath there. Well, when we brought cars down from Canada, they had to go through customs. So we'd have a customs agent would come in and get a list from me of the cars that he had to inspect. Lumber cars weren't inspected, but closed box cars and stuff like that were inspected. One time, for example, we discovered a bunch of stolen motorcycles, but that was a boxcar going up into Canada. In any case, this agent was a smaller fella, and he kind of had a chip in his shoulder all the time. So he came in with like 11 o'clock at night, comes barging right into the office, and the dog came out from underneath the desk and put his paws up, pushed that guy up against the wall, had his paws up here like this. I thought the guy was gonna mess his pants. But he caused me a little problem because he went to this office. He said, hey, told him what the hell was going on, and I got a thing from the Milwaukee Road said, hey, you can't have your dog down here anymore. But I have to tell you, at Black River Yard is out by Long Acres. It's a fairly sized switch yard that was used by the Milwaukee when the trains came out of Tacoma and out of Seattle, and they merged there, and they traded loads depending on what their destination, whether they're going to go to Tacoma and on off to Portland, or whether they're going to go to Everett or Bellingham or further north. And it was, there was a hobo junction out there, hobo jungle out there. And that dog was just fabulous. He walked maybe a half a car or a full car length ahead of me, and I knew exactly what was going to be up, what was ahead of me, whether there might be somebody there to caught me with a noggin or something. Because these guys were breaking into the auto racks. They were stealing stuff out of the automobiles and so forth. Anyway, he was a big asset there, so I didn't get too much trouble from the railroad for that, but anyway.
So here's Cliff Hughes, and you took over for Cliff, didn't you?
Well, this gentleman, his name is Cliff Hughes. I came down there, and like I said, around '73. Cliff was running things by himself, but it was only the MT 20 and 21, and so he was ready to retire. And so he was quite a gambler at the racetrack. So when he left, and so I started cleaning out the desk, the office, move my stuff in, his stuff. The whole bottom drawer, which on the one side usually be a pretty deep drawer, was full of Longacre's track losers. He's a nice fellow. I learned a lot from him for a very short period of time.
We'll talk about the lineage of these photographs when we get into the credits section. It's very interesting. So here we got a picture in the North Coast days, Frank, of you guys switching, and then these are those grain cars. And didn't you keep a guy at work just working on those grain cars?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Like the car knocker?
What was in those grain cars?
No, you were the guy that used to change out the brake shoes and build a Union Pacific for him.
So, okay. In the railroad industry, when you had, say, a Milwaukee Railroad car, and when it was switched over to the UP or the BN, well, then the BN car knocker, he was a maintenance person on railroad called a car knocker. He would walk those cars to see if they were in satisfactory condition to be on their trains. And so, and then if they found something like brake shoes or something, a door half off or some damn thing, they made the repair and then they billed the owner of the rail car. And so I thought, well, shoot, I'm going to do the same damn thing. It's Seattle, North Coast. I need to pay these guys wages. So every time the UP came down here with a bunch of rail cars, I had them walk the cars, and if the brakes were at such a point to be replaced, we replaced them, and we got reimbursed for it. So I paid his wages with it. So let's see, this was 1980? No.
This is 82 in this picture, yeah. Okay. So this was after the North Coast. So Frank, tell us, this is, okay, so remember we looked at that map and we saw how the barge slip was across East Marginal Way from the rest of the yard, and here's where that crossed. So that was, what would happen?
This is the main track that I mentioned some time ago when we saw the whole layout of the yard. And so we had to go across here, and then the office building that you saw previously is right here. To get these cars stopped, and these cars stopped, was not easy. You'd have to go out, two guys had to go out with fusees, and sometimes I'd even have them down here at Holgate Street to stop the trucks, especially the container trucks trying to go into the shipyards. So getting across here was pretty difficult, but you can see how poor condition. Look at this joint here, can't hardly see how they make it through there, but.
We were kind of on a hope and a prayer at that point, even in the North Coast days. So here's another picture. Now we see a good close-up, and you can see some of your different barges, Frank.
Well, I don't know. Let's see, this is...
That's probably here's 20 and 21. But then this is a Foss barge.
This is the Fort Townsend barges, 20 and 21. This is the 250. That's a 4-track barge. This is probably the Carroll Foss here. That's a D boat. A D boat was, Foss had boats like the Diane, the Dorothy, and the David. They were very powerful, but they're small, very, very good for manipulation, where the Carroll was a really good boat for a straightaway. They did improve it by putting directional propellers underneath there that made it a little better for handling ships. I say she couldn't go up the Duwamish River because she couldn't control herself. So they fixed that. But she primarily hauled these two barges to Port Townsend for Foss. And I think this is the Foss 118. That held like 15 cars. That went to Port Gamble, went to Shelton, went to Bellingham, miscellaneous stuff. And when the lumber yards, like at Port Gamble or Shelton, if they didn't have anything, well, they might make a run up to Vancouver, up to British Columbia, to load some BC cars on there. And so one time, the weather is really bad in the Straits at Deception Pass, and you guys that have boats, you know what I'm talking about. And so the skipper was a pretty, very knowledgeable guy, a pretty risky guy. He brought that barge down through the Laconner. And the people in Laconner just about crapped their pants. So he gets down to the bottom of the Swinomish Slough. How do you make that corner down there with a 318-foot barge?
Yeah.
Well, he did it, and he got in here and got unloaded, and then highballed right down to Shelton to get a load of lumber.
So just a couple of quick notes. Here's Frank's pedestrian overpass at Lander Street that he sold, and this is where the grade crossing was from the yard to the barge area, and you can see where some of the other grade crossings had been over the years as that area.
And this is a walkway to nowhere now.
Yeah, that's
the other end is the end that I sold to Alaska.
So here's a picture from this is a little before your time, Frank. This is 1929. The Northern Pacific Railroad went around and took pictures of all of the Northern Pacific stuff, but then they also took a picture of our Milwaukee Road terminal. And it's a little hard to read, but at the bottom, the caption on this picture, which is quite humorous, I think, says, "This photograph is included in the record merely as a matter of general interest." So, and they call it a gridiron. So you can kind of see that. It's kind of like a little bit of a gridiron there. So
That's a mess.
yeah, 1929 in the Milwaukee.
That's the steam tug there.
That's a steam tug, yeah, indeed. So we'll look in more detail. Here we see him loading a barge. This is a John Illman photo. Mr. Illman was from Marrowstone Island, if we know where that is. Very famous railroad photographer. We're very fortunate to be able to have his pictures. So they're loading, Frank.
Well, here's one of the interesting things here. This is all timber. There's no iron trusses or beams or anything. It's all timber, all bolted and stuff together by hand. Very complicated, but very, very well done and very, very strong. And so these are the two idlers that I was telling you about earlier. So this hoghead can look down here and see what the heck's going on. And so this appears to be just a 3-track barge. And he's gonna pick up, this will be track 3. He'll pull that down and then he'll double over, come up here to a switch, and then he'll come back down this track and connect, this is 4 cars deep, so he'll connect the 4th car onto that, and then he'll pull down, and then he'll come back down and pick this up. So he's got a dozen to 15 cars, and he takes them out to the yard there and comes back with that many cars roughly and puts them back on that barge. And that, a really good turnaround is like maybe an hour and a half. And then that barge gets moved out. The guys will go take a coffee break or do some switching, and then while that's being done, this other barge is sitting here, will be brought in here.
And here we are. We can see it in the Seattle and North Coast here, Frank, where we're bringing some loads down out of Canada.
Yeah, so this is the Foss 118. I say that because of the way this lumber is stacked on here. And I did have a serious incident there getting this off of the barge where the cars were quite heavy and the barge came down like this at the stern and the ramp was up like this and the rail car came off of here. When it got up here, the bottom of the rail car hung up here and derailed. And there was a ship being unloaded right across the way in the East Waterway. And Manson had a crane down there, a floating crane that they had loaded stuff on the ship, and they were watching porno movies on the side of the big sheet metal building there. And so I called Tyke Hillman, I think it was. And I said, hey, I need a crane over here at Pier 27. So he rattled all the guys up, and they used their tug and their barge to bring the crane over, picked that car up and put it on the track. And I repaired, I had a couple guys from the Seattle yard come over. We repaired the track, and we were back in business in a matter of a few hours. And so then the bill came from the crane company. And so it went to Chicago. And so about at least 2 months later, I get called on the carpet. Who gave you authority to spend the money to get a crane when we have a steam-powered crane in Tacoma and we could have been down there and fixed that? And I said, yeah, it would have taken you 3 or 4 days to get here, and I'm back in business the next morning. Look at all the tonnage that I put. So I got a big plus out of the deal anyway. I had very few arguments after that also.
I would think, yeah. So this is is it a galley span?
Yeah, this is called galley span, just like you see here at the ferry dock. And at the ferry dock, you got hydraulic cylinders in here. But in this case, there's big concrete blocks in here. I can't tell you what they weighed, but probably maybe 10 tons. And here, and then you have this big shiv here. And the cable went over another one of those shifts here to raise. There's a power system over here that could raise and lower these concrete counterweights, and that's how you raised and lowered the apron.
Frank, the road bed there, the bridge bed, all the wood in there, was that all fir?
Probably.
All fir in the wood?
The cross ties were made out of fir. Probably, or oak, could have been hardwood too.
Most likely they were, but there were a lot of oak ties. But oak ties would split pretty easy. If they weren't pre-drilled, oak ties would split. You had to be able to drive the spike in three strokes. And you had, I still have my spike maul. And the spike maul is, one end of the spike maul is about 14 inches long, and the other end is only like 10 inches long. So the 10-inch side is the side that you were working on the track. That's the spike that you could drive with that maul. So you drove that spike like that, and then you twisted the maul over so that you had the longer steel so you didn't break the handle off when you hit the rail.
There you go. So
Anyway, this is a complicated thing. And of course, this is a ladder to go up in case there's something goes wrong. And sure as hell things go wrong. I don't remember how it was. Oh, so the barge was left underneath here that raised the apron up as the tide came in with the barge underneath here. It raised the apron way up like this and so high that the concrete blocks sat on the bottom. So when that happened, we got slack in this control mechanism, and it came off. This is like 1 or 2 in the morning. And
who's climbing up there in the middle of the night to fix this?
I'm down here with a flashlight in my mouth, and I'm up here, and I put that thing back on that shift. And when I put it on there, it moved a little ways. And when it moved, it grabbed my shirt right here. And in order to get away, I had to rip my shirt off. I went over to the yard office, no front shirt.
Question, go ahead.
Frank, did those steel rails flex on the apron?
So the question is, do these rails flex?
Yes.
Oh, they do.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
They flex up and down like this, but not like this.
So, but wouldn't the...
Yeah, so you can barely see, like right in here, yeah, right here, and right here, and right here. Maybe there's 2 places here. We had what was called gauge rods, so that the rail couldn't spread apart. And we used to have a lot of trouble lining these tracks up with the tracks on the barge. So I got very large turnbuckles, really big, heavy-duty turnbuckles with you have a piece of chain on each end and a crank, and then I put instead of tie plates here, I had steel plates about a foot long or better, and that allowed this whole end of the track could move a little bit like this or a little bit like that. You only needed like maybe 6 to 10 inches to be able to line up with the barges, because not every barge was the same on the stern. They were all the same this way, but the distance between this track and this track could be a couple inches different. So in order to keep from derailing them, we did that, and it worked very, very good. And one other thing I did is I took a torch and I nipped the inside corners of the rail to help guide the wheels into the proper place.
So one quick question. Didn't your friend Bob Shanklin put these devices in?
Yeah, this is, we used to do this by hand. You might see a photo someplace.
We have a photo of it.
Like a great big ship's wheel that we cranked to pull the barges in. The cable will go from here through here and onto the barge. So this is an electric over hydraulic winch, and that didn't go in there until almost the end of time, almost like 1980 or so.
So here we got some pictures. These are courtesy of the Port of Seattle. Very grateful to have these images.
Yeah, so this is the barge 21. You can see the 20 is sitting over here. She's already unloaded. This is when the steel mill was still next door. That was before the container ship unloading and loading took place here. This went over to the 6th Avenue. This is the Carol Foss. This is anhydrous ammonia car. And I had a number of go-arounds with the Coast Guard in regards to how or where I put that. They wanted to know where any hazardous material was on the barges. And this fellow that I was dealing with, he was trying to be a dictator, tell me what to do, so to speak. I say, listen, I know what I'm doing. I'll send you a draft. Don't tell me what to do. And Chuck knows what how I work. So these are box cars that are going to be loaded with newspaper, newsprint, or magazine stuff. Maybe some shingles, but very, very few shingles anymore. Shingles used to be loaded in 40-foot box cars. Most of the railroads only had 40-foot box cars for years, but then they went up to 50, and then to 55, and then to 60, and then even plus 60. But so there's the Carol Foss again. These are empties going up north. So the Carol's going to pull this barge around and make a big spin and connect it up to the bow of the barge 20, and then head north.
So here you get a kind of overall picture. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. Frank, what did you use for communication capability to the tugs, to the engineer, to the guys on the docks? How did you communicate?
A whistle or a whistle punk or a fusee.
A QZ?
Yeah, 3 cars.
A fusee,
3 shakes with a fusee.
like a little flare.
I'd be on the top of the car giving a signal to the engineer. 2 cars, 3 cars.
Yeah.
We got radios. We had a hard time getting the radios because the union was concerned that we'd reduce the crews. But we started getting radios, and originally I used to find the radios sometimes in the bathroom or the toilet of the caboose because the crews were upset about reducing the number of people on a train cruise, especially when we got rid of the cabooses. And that's still a problem today, because they want to have like 3 guys up with the engineer. So, okay, here you are. You're coming back. The barge is coming back from Port Townsend. That's the Carroll up there, and we're coming into Puget Sound. That's Harbor Island there, and you'll be breaking up, splitting up the 2 barges, going in between them. Yeah, there you brought them in the slip. So, and sometimes they, okay.
Well, go ahead, finish this. And then we'll go to the
sometimes
next one.
the tide would be either too high or too low to load these 2 kinds of barges. So they might go along this would be the east fence, and that'd be the west fence.
It's the west fence, and the other one's the east fence.
And so while they're sitting waiting for the tide, we might unload or load a Foss barge because they had ballast tanks in them. They could lower the barge, or they sat out of the water much higher. They were pretty seaworthy barges compared to the 20 and 21.
The 20 and 21 were for Puget Sound, and the Foss barges could go to Alaska and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. What's going on here?
Well, here's this could be the breakup. This is the barge that you saw earlier when they were coming into town, because that's the ammonia car that you saw in there. And so here they're disconnecting from the tug. This is the stern of the tug here, and then the tug will slide alongside, and that's a pretty tough job. I mean, this is a cable. It's not a rope, and it's not something that you can tell it what to do. Here he's dealing with a rope, but so they're tying up. I don't remember this Loomy Bay thing. It happened. I was there before my time.
A wooden hull tugboat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that gives you some idea of the date. This is these pictures were taken by the Port of Seattle in the late 1960s. So what are these guys doing here, Frank? Looks like he's got like a lasso or something.
Well, that's the tugboat is in the middle here, and this is the barge 21, and this is the barge 20, and so I don't know whether he is. That's the tagline there. So he is picking this line up from this guy. This is I say this is the tagline. So this guy threw him the tagline because he can't throw this thing, and so he gets the tagline and he'll put it on a cleat someplace here and do whatever they're going to do. But handling trying to cast this is not easy, and just probably not going to make it. So we use the tagline. There's a skipper inside the tug.
Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question?
Are those tugs still used? Not tugs, but the barges still used today?
No, they're long gone. There still is a barge that goes to Alaska, but that doesn't load out of this location. So here's the captain.
Yeah. I never met this gentleman, at least not that I'm aware of.
What are they doing here?
Well, once again, he's throwing a tagline to probably get this heavy rope put on here, would be my assumption. See, here he is. So there's your tagline again, and this is, I think this guy's name is Tom. He's a barge man. On the Milwaukee, they had what were called barge men, and they lived in this trailer-like arrangement on the barge, and it was their responsibility to handle the lines on the barges. So we didn't have employees going from the tugboat onto the barges and wandering around on the barges. So they had a coal bunker at Pier 27. They would come down to work, and they would get a wheelbarrow and load the wheelbarrow up with coal and bring it on, because that's how they heated this cabin. This lower portion here was a storage yard, and then up above they had a kitchen and a bunk.
You know, I always wonder, I look at pictures like this, and I always wonder how people didn't ever fall in. I mean, if you ever had me on a barge, they would say, no, you go back to the office and count the stamps. You know, we don't need you out here. So here he is. What are we doing here?
Well, this is a capstan, and it's a rotating winch, so to speak, and they've taken a couple turns on here, and this is a guide for keeping the line coming. This is what you might call a 6-inch line. You'll see them when they tie up the ferry. And you know, it's really quite a joke when they tie up the ferry. You know, they just whip it around the cleat. And it's got all the slack in it. It's supposed to hold the ship in place. Anyway, it was a lot different than doing this. But so this is the bow of the tug. So I'm not sure.
Maybe a Foss tug or a Foss barge? Hard to say.
Could be anything. I just can't place it. Oh, so this is the ship's wheel thing I was kind of talking about. So you can see how much it takes to move this chain to impact this counterweight over here. And then right here, this is a dog that can lock in here to stop this thing. So when you were trying to take the tension off of this here, you had to push down here and with one hand reach out and drop that dog back. And if there's a lot of tension, this thing would whirl like an airplane prop. Very, very hazardous. We eventually, towards the very end, we got rid of it.
And that's when those hydraulics went in that we saw in one of the earlier images. So I wanted to make sure that we could see how they used to do it and then how they do it. This would be in the pre-OSHA days. Yes, sir.
Is that wrenching the ramp up and down, or is it wrenching the barge in and out?
Is this raising and lowering?
Yes.
Or is it pulling the barge in?
This one is just pulling the barge in.
Okay, so that's pulling the barge tight.
Raising and lowering them was a little electronic gear over here.
Now, I know we're running a little behind schedule, but we're having fun. I just want to mention that these photographs have never been seen in public before, and these are I'll talk about it in the credits, but the Port of Seattle had these pictures in their archive and were very gracious in sharing them with us for today's presentation.
You can see a radio here. This guy's got a radio, but he's a tugboat employee, not a railroad employee.
So here's your friend Tom again. What's he doing? What's
So
all this business?
Yeah, that's Tom again, and he's using a bar. This is before we put the adjustable tracks on, so he's using this bar trying to force this track. He's literally trying to move the barge or the apron a little bit to get that track to fit down in his pocket. And there you can see where I burned off the tips of the rail to force the...
So think about it. You've got this barge, and you're using a crowbar to move this thing back and forth so that the rails line up like this, because you need to have that, or it isn't gonna work out.
That's all old stuff there.
That's old stuff, yeah. It's and this is a barge number 20. So, okay. So now I asked the question to Frank: why is this guy up here with a fishing pole? Frank, what is this guy doing?
Well, he's probably the first mate on the tugboat, or it could be the captain. The first mate could be running the boat, and the captain could be up there giving them directions on what to do.
So is this a fishing pole?
No, that's a radio.
You know, because you always think about the Edgewater Hotel, and it's like fish from your boxcar, and it's like, no, that's not what it is.
A long time ago in Seattle, if you were like in West Seattle, when I delivered the PI paper in West Seattle in the 50s, you could hear the whistle punk, where they used to whistle, give signals by whistle.
So here's a picture of the 20 and the barge slip.
Right.
You know, we've kind of seen this.
Don't ask me who he is. I don't know who he is.
We know who he is. Aaron. Where's Aaron? We know who this guy. We figured out who this guy is this morning. I'll get Aaron from the credits to come back up here for a second.
I believe it was Steve Shaven was the engineer.
Steve Shaven.
Who?
Steve Shaven.
I don't know.
Now, folks, I got to tell you, there's a little spoiler alert coming in these next couple of pictures, so I want you to pay close attention. Right there. Okay? Who is that guy?
I don't know. You got a t-shirt on? That's me.
There you go. Yeah, so Frank photobombed his own picture.
You know, I never let my wife down there. My wife had never been down there.
Here are these guys. What are we doing?
Yeah, so, well, now here you can really see the difference. This is the Foss 250. You can see the high bow. It's almost as high as the top of a rail car. See the freeboard? And there's water. They put water inside the tank here to give the barge this list to the stern to make it easier to transfer. The 250 was a pretty good piece of equipment.
And of course, guys, you know, with no safety, no personal protective equipment, right? Just sitting on the edge of the tugboat.
You know what was really good here was the food.
We got a picture of that coming up. So, okay, so we've got this guy right here.
Yeah, well, that's me again.
Yeah, that's you again. You could tell everybody it's okay. And the crew, and the caption on this picture is Frank Zellerhoff instructs how to unload the barge was the caption on this one. So, and here's another one with the I don't know what he's running this wheel. And then, of course, this is probably the best picture that we have of you in this whole sequence, Frank, right there, with that kind of that muscle shirt. You were kind of a hunk of a guy back in the day, huh? Yeah, so. Okay, here's some more barges, right?
Yeah, so there the 250 is unloaded, and it's at the east fence.
And here's the Carroll. And of course, all the Foss barges were named for children in the family. So Carroll was one of the Foss kids, and Deborah was one of the Foss kids, and so on and so forth.
I don't know what barge we're talking about here.
We're unloading. That's what we want to capture here.
CIT.
Yeah,
So
Canada.
this is coming down from Canada. This is Canadian lumber, and there were prefab homes inside these boxcars at times. And they weren't allowed to sell their lumber in Washington, Oregon, or Idaho. That was like a tariff thing or shipping
Whatever those
thing.
are.
I don't like to use that word right now.
Yeah, I don't either.
Anyway,
Yeah, here we are again. Here's the 250, and
there
our
you can
little
really
structure.
see. There you can really see the ramp, how they've ballasted this barge to get down, to keep us down, to be able to get on and off of the barge, and we're getting the list there pretty good too. These are heavy cars. That's green lumber. This is green lumber. That's dry lumber.
They're 100-ton cars. So yeah, it was a big deal getting them on and off a little floating barge. It's like if
This
you
is
could
a
imagine getting them
coal
off
bin
a cork.
here.
Yeah.
There you can see the list. So you can see how it's tilted like that. And so once in a while, on the older ferries, you used to be able to feel it sometimes. But the newer ferries, you don't really feel it too much. Oh, you go to Tacoma, if they bring a double truck and trailer across, you'll feel the apron go up and down. But getting a list like this, trying to get across this joint here, can be pretty hairy because the tonnage that you got here is really pushing on this track.
So then, didn't you have to do one track and then another track? How did that work?
Well, so you can see this was it appears to me that this is the 4-track barge. So it appears to me that this is the first track that was unloaded, and now it's gone over to the 3rd track, to one that's more in the middle, next to this one, and then pull that off, and then he'll come back and just put empties on this side, and then shift the barge over and pull this one off and the other outboard.
Now, I'm just going to mention, there's not a lot of clearance on these barges, so you don't really want to be walking between the cars.
Didn't want to be in between there.
No. And here
so there you can see what I was talking about. So now this was that track that you saw here a little while ago, and now they double over and they come up against here and pull that off. They take that out to the street and bring back the 4 empties, put on the empty track over there, and then take these 2 loads off, come back with 12 empties, 12 or 16 empties to put in these 3 tracks. Well, this is a drawbar, and this is a knuckle. That's a locking pin, and cut lever is over here. So this is a fixed knuckle. It's attached to the bow of the barge, and I can't tell which barge. I don't think that's the 250, but so this is the pin. If this pin is up, then this knuckle can open up. So when the train crew pushes this on here and makes this joint, you have a trainman back here that's giving instructions, maybe all the way down to maybe 10 feet. And then so the hoghead is being very gentle, and he makes this joint. And then the trainman will say, back up, easy back up. So he backs up a little bit to make sure this pin has dropped to lock this thing in here, just like it would be in the railroad on the train. And then he has them come ahead, and he bunches this piece here goes into the drawbar here, and the slot in the drawbar here is almost twice the size of this. So you have this 6 or 8 inches of play in this drawbar. And so we had to bunch this, you had to push them all together so they were all up tight, and then set the air brakes and pump up the air, or not, just set the air brakes, and then you walk down and put the handbrake on top of it, and then you cut the locomotive loose when they could do something else. But that was really important to be connected like this. So one time when I put together a deal to take salt out of Utah up to Alaska for the Alaska Highway Department, and the cars were like only about 40 feet long, weighed 100 tons, and it was they were trying to figure out the best way to do it. So I put together a deal for Foss, or no, it was with Peter Bricks Maritime, to bring one of their barges in, and that was like a 5-track barge, really heavy-duty barge that could go all the way up to the oil fields in Alaska. And we put the salt on there, really heavy. We could only put 2 cars on at a time, AC-doocy. So they get up to Alaska, and the trainman pulls the pin on the wrong track, and the cars start sliding off into the water like a giant Alka-Seltzer. And there was a big investigation. And they sent insurance people and railroad people down from the Alaska Railroad to watch us without us knowing it. They went back and they told them, went up, say, you better get that guy up here and show you how to do this.
Yeah, so the key takeaway here is you can't have any slack in these things or they're going to start sloshing around. And then didn't you have like a something to keep the wheels from moving?
Yeah, we had a large clamp that was, weighed about 70, 75 pounds. You had a handle on it. And then it had a big a wheel that you could spin. It was on a thread. You could tighten it up to the track. It fit over the top of the track and it clamped on the track. And then you tightened it up like that. And then you used a big maul and you tapped that down there. And that stood about that high, about maybe a quarter of the way up the wheel. So that was a wheel block, a chock, so to speak. Like on the ferry, they put a piece of wood in front of your front
If you're
tire.
the lead car. Yes, ma'am.
Did weather ever stop your operation of the transfer?
What about weather and what about tides?
Well, tides.
Well, weather for the Foss barges wasn't much of a big deal. For the Milwaukee barges, flat barges, you know, even though they were only going to Port Townsend, they were still getting up into the straits. If they went around Marrowstone, they had to be very careful going around Marrowstone, because if the wind was coming out of the west and the tide was coming in, they could have a 9 or 10 foot sea there. And with empty cars on board, they could get flipped off. So once in a while, you sneak through the cut. Pretty dangerous to go through the cut with a set of barges. I took my boat through there a couple times when I thought maybe I shouldn't have. But
Yeah, it's not like that you could stop a barge. They don't have brakes, you know. So again, here's a picture of the 20 and the 21 with one of the Foss tugs.
I would say that this is still in the slip, and this is going to go in the slip. So the tug is going to go out here like this and spin that barge around there like this and be tied up at what we call the west fence. This will be kind of a drift. Before he gets out of here, I get a line on this barge. So while he's putzing around getting this around here, I'm fooling around getting this in by hand with my winches.
By hand. So then didn't you end up, what happened the time that you ended up getting stuck on a barge tied up to the Dolphin?
Well, that was...
This is not funny. This is
that was
lucky.
several years later when I was working for Bricks Maritime in a different location. I was working down at Pier 15 and a half on Harbor Island, and I had unloaded rail cars off of one of their barges. I'm going to just say the barge Seattle, and that was a really ocean-going, big piece of equipment. It had tanks inside the hull that held caustic soda or some other chemicals, black oil. And so we would unload the barges at Pier 15 and a half, and then the barge would go to Tacoma and they get loaded with chemicals, or the hull, chemicals in the hull. It would come back and it would be like maybe 6 feet further down in the water than it was when it left. So in any case, I unloaded the barge, and they had a crew change on the tugboat, so they left. I had to get the barge out from underneath the apron because it couldn't stay there, so I went out on the barge and I got a line off of the Dolphins, like you see down at the ferry dock. The line would be curled up on top of the Dolphin, and I could reach out there with a big stick, like a 20-foot long pike pole, and I could pull that line in, and I would tie it off onto the onto the cleats or so on the barge, and then I'd go back, walk off of the barge, and then release the cable to disconnect the barge from the apron, and how the hell was it? Anyway, I I got one of his back on the barge, and the tide's going out, so the barge drifts away from the apron. I'm tying it off with these big lines that you saw, and so I finally get everything settled down, but I can't get off the barge. Now this is around midnight, and fortunately I don't remember it really being a rainy bad night. But so right on the beach there was Tom Crowley's dispatching office. And so with my flashlight, I sent him SOS. And then finally they got the message, and they brought a little tug over and picked me up.
It's midnight, do you know where your father is? You know, kind of thing, right? So here we are, we're getting ready, we're coming to the end here. We're getting ready to head out of town. Here's the barge, getting ready to drag out. So
Yeah, they're heading out.
they're heading out. And here we go.
Yeah,
What's he doing?
I don't know, maybe playing a band. Oh, he could be raising these tubes up.
Tubes?
Most of them are hydraulic. That's a very dangerous place to be because something could, if you turn just a little bit, he's gone.
Yeah, I know. I was wondering. And of course, no personal protective equipment back in the day.
I don't know who it is.
Yeah, so I was just impressed by this picture. I mean, look, when they just bulldozed their way to Port Townsend on these barges. It's amazing, Frank. Yeah.
Yeah, these barges used to have to go into the shipyard like every other year for maintenance, painting and maintenance, and that was all managed by Foss. This barge was owned by the Milwaukee, but Foss had a contract for maintaining them.
That's a good photo of showing the chocks.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. How you read my mind. Yeah.
How did the chocks
Oh yeah,
stay?
the track block.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How do they stay on there?
Huh?
How do they keep from falling off?
They're clamped on. They go over the top of the rail like you grab it like that,
Okay.
and then you spin. You spin. There's a ratchet thing. These are pretty small. For the 20 and 21, they're quite small. We also used to take a railroad tie and put it across there and then chain it down at times.
Is another way. But then the ocean-going barges, like the ones that went to Alaska and places like that, then had a much larger chock because these are just for Puget Sound. And there we can see we're starting to head out of town.
Yeah.
We got our two barges, and this is always the 21, and this is always the 20? Is that
Yeah.
how it works?
Yeah.
Okay, and why is that?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. Because one of them had backup lights on it.
Is that?
The lighting, the lights. The 20 had lights on the back.
Oh. So these are clearance lights here, port and starboard lights here. They are oil-fired lights. And then, so this barge would have a stern light. So any ship traffic would, any opposing traffic or even coming up from the stern would see the stern light, and then they'd pick that up. So that's how they. There's a better view.
Yeah, you can see the.
In fact, these two are sitting in my garage right now.
You know, there you go. So. And
I don't remember this gentleman. He's a skipper on the Milwaukee tug.
yeah, this is a little before. This is 1969. It's before Frank got down here, but it's just kind of a cool picture of him with his barge in the background. So this, I love this picture with the menu, and then the skipper over here having breakfast with the cook in the background with a container of Dairy Gold milk and an ashtray that had a lid so it didn't fall off, and these sort of gaps in the table, so if something spilled, it would just spill right onto the floor. Yeah, this was eggs to order. Yeah, they had eggs back then, and little pig sausages. Yeah, these are classic photos. And here we are heading out of town with the barge. So I've just got a couple of credits to go through. Oh, well, there is this story. This is a little before Frank's time. December 31st, 1949, what this magazine, Seattle Times, Seattle PI article, Frank was a PI delivery person, as was I. December 31st, 1949, The barge was sitting in Elliott Bay and it got rammed by a freighter and sank. So how can a boxcar float if it's full of lumber? That gave it buoyancy. And of course, the Seattle PI, in their infinite journalistic wisdom, said, out of their element.
But they wouldn't have the wheels.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had the wheels. And the good news was that all 4 people that were on the barge were saved. So there was no loss of life on this.
Oh,
All right, what's the story here?
well, this is exaggerated. Any case, one particular time I'm sitting in the office and I got a train crew switching cars with the idea of putting them on the barge, and they moved along pretty fast. So the next thing I knew, I look out the window and here they're coming across the street, and I know that the barge isn't underneath the apron yet. It's just still tied back from the apron. And so I bailed out of the garage and I jumped on the cars and I'm trying to stop the damn thing. And I finally get it stopped, but not until one of the cars was over the hinge pier. And so the weight of the barge then, the weight of the car on the apron, not being supported by the barge, broke the cables and down it went. But the whole car didn't go in like this. Just one set of one set of trucks went in. It was still a big chore, but.
The 2 things I will say. 1, it could have been worse. And 2, special thanks to Alan Miller, who's in the audience on Zoom today, for creating this original artwork. Thank you, Alan. So, all right. So now we're getting to the credits, and I'm just going to handle this. Some of the photographs we used today are from the Center for Railroad Photography and Art in Madison, Wisconsin. They made the John Illman images available to us. We used some of those Illman images last year for the Squiminar, so special thanks goes to them. Photographers today, Port of Seattle being the top. So the Port of Seattle had a magazine article I'll show you here in a second. These are just the photographers, and here's some of our researchers, Virginia Wright, who's a big help, Chuck Soule, Alan Miller, Tim Repp. Frank Zellerhoff had some pictures in his collection that we used for today's presentation as well. And the skipper of the Milwaukee tug, which was retired in, the 1950s or something. So it was long gone before Frank hit the scene. So the Port of Seattle had a Reporter magazine that was their in-house publication, and they had an article on our barge operation in April of 1969, April 1st of 69. We just had April 1st this week. And so I just sort of, being the kind of guy I am, I reached out to the Port of Seattle and said, hey, could we get a copy of this original image? Well, I contacted Chris Guzlio, and he put me in contact with Devin Donnelly. Devin Donnelly contacted me the next day and said, well, you know, there was 7 pictures in this magazine article. There's 107 images in total. Would you like those other images? And I'm like, hip, hip, hooray. And so very kind, very gracious on the part of the Port of Seattle to provide these images. A number of those black and white photographs that you saw today have never been seen in public before. So we owe them a great deal of thanks. I want a special thanks to the Vashon Heritage Museum for this week's presentation. That's my friend Greta. And next week we will be at the Highline Heritage Museum in beautiful downtown Burien, Washington for our 2nd version of this program. You can watch this program. It'll be on YouTube at some point, maybe even like today or tomorrow or something. And it's going to be available in the future. Cascade Rail Foundation, I'm a member of Cascade Rail Foundation. We keep our collection of all of this stuff that we're using to share with you today at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive in Burien, Washington. And PNRA, Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, provided the Zoom stream for today's program, which made it possible for folks to watch this online and in the future. our video person, Joshua Wiersma, in the back. And our map that you saw coming in the front door was created by Brad at Aurelian Designs. I'm Jonathan Fisher, your executive producer for today's program. And all I can say is so long and thanks for watching. And here we've got a guy on the dock waving goodbye to us. So that is the end of our first program.